and streamed live. A link is available on the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council website to the YouTube platform, where the public can view the meeting live and watch recordings of previous council meetings. In accordance with the Local Government Act 1993 and Regulation 33, these audio-video files will be retained by Council for at least 6 months and made available for viewing live as well as online within 5 days of the scheduled meeting. The written minutes of a meeting, once confirmed, prevail over audio and video recording of meeting. So I officially declare the meeting open. Welcome everybody along. All the councillors are present. Apologies from the General Manager, who has gone home sick this morning. So everybody else is here. Any declarations of pecuniary interest from any of the councillors with the agenda today? No, thank you very much. Agenda item 2, confirmation of minutes and workshops. 2.1, ordinary meeting the 24th of October 2017. That the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 24th of October 2017 be confirmed as true and correct record. Someone care to move that to be the case? Councillor Steiner, Councillor Woods, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. 2.2, ordinary meeting, that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 28th of November to be confirmed as a true and correct record. Somebody move the same, please. Councillor Woods. Councillor Farmer. All those in favour? Against? Carried. 2.3, workshop held on the 28th of November. The council notes this for information purposes. We're now moving over to agenda item 3. Planning Authority section under Regulation 25 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulation 2005. The chairperson hereby declares that the council is now acting as a planning authority under the provisions of the Land Use Planning Approvals Act 1993 for section 3 of the agenda. The recommendation, the council now acts as a planning authority. Someone care to move? Moved Councillor Crawford, second Councillor Woods. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Now I note with interest at this stage the town planner is not with us, so Mrs. Ennis, could you?
I'm happy for us to keep going. He's obviously been delayed because
yes.
We did envisage that he would be here for the council meeting, so...
Okay. All right, so we'll see how we go, and hopefully he gets here very shortly. Agenda item 3.1, 2 visitor accommodation units, 28 Jetty Road, Coles Bay. The recommendation is on page 15. Would someone care to move the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move, Mr Mayor, if I may, that pursuant to section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approves Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015, that the application for 2 visitor accommodation buildings at 28 Jetty Road, Coles Bay, DA 2017/277 be approved, subject to the following conditions 1 to 16.
We have a second, councillors. Deputy Mayor, thank you. Open for discussion, councillors. Councillor Wisby.
Thanks, Mayor Ken. The setbacks. So on page 13 it states at the top it says the northern boundary, a compliant setback would be 3.3 metres, and this application is 0.6 from my reading, and the southern boundary, the compliance setback would be 4.25, and this is 3.3, so significant differences there on compliance and actual. So this is the one with the 2 units. It just appears to be too much building on a piece of land. I won't be voting for this tonight because of the setbacks.
Thank you, Councillor Wisby. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Crawford?
Excuse me, thank you, Mayor Kent. I also have a problem with this. If councillors, page 21, if you actually have a look at, like Councillor Wisby was talking about, setbacks, so the southern setback, you can see there's already an existing dwelling there, which I think note mentions in the actual report that didn't comply with the setbacks. So what we're having here is a problem of, like, we're starting to allow things not to comply, and then they impact. So, you know, it's going to impact on that existing dwelling that's already doesn't comply to the setback but was allowed to go ahead, and then you have this one that doesn't comply with the setback too, that actually exacerbates the problem. So I have an issue with that. I also have a concern with on page 21, if you have a look on the blue in the middle, it says strata property 2. So that is also something that concerns me, that we've talked about, and people, excuse me, it has been said that you can't do anything about strata titles, but in effect we can actually do something, because if it's a de facto strata title, it's a subdivision in disguise, and this is what appears to me. So if you look at the history of this, how when they first actually applied to have two buildings plus another big building, so they've actually subdivided their land. That's I think the one at the back's the original one that was went to appeal. So I think once again this is overdevelopment. Just on one other point, I have another problem with on the top of page 12, when they talk about visitor accommodation, and visitor accommodation doesn't, the private open space doesn't, sorry, it's on the top of page 11, doesn't require visitor accommodation, requiring private open space for visitor accommodation. And I think that's perhaps something we need to look at, certainly in the new statewide scheme, because that would mean that almost like, once again, a de facto, that you can get visitor accommodation up without open public space, and then there's a reasonable chance later on you'll be able to actually take it back to residential. So I think I'd like planners to note that I am concerned about that issue. So I can't actually support this today because, yeah, as I've said, it's actually, I think it's an overdevelopment. It's quite a large block. It's not the size of the block. I just think it's overdevelopment even on that size block. Also, I just wanted to point out on page 15, on the second box in that table, where it says lack of shadow diagram in application, and the response from the from the planner is that a requirement for shadow diagrams from the applicant would have been excessive, but we see from the representors that they actually were forced, well, needed to actually employ someone to do a shadow diagram to actually put in a submission. So I think we need to be careful that we don't actually put things that perhaps should be presented by the applicant onto people that are objecting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Mrs Ennis.
Through the Mayor, I'd just like to address some of those issues that were brought up. Now, Councillor Crawford mentioned something about private open space or no open space being provided on page 12. What section were you referring to specifically there? Because I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Through the Chair, I'm not actually here to give responses, but it says that It doesn't, I'm not talking about the private open space that's needed, because the planner's already said it's not needed. What I was concerned about is if people that put in for visitor accommodation want to revert it later to residential, because they don't actually have to have open space for visitor accommodation, that it make it more difficult to comply later for if they want to revert to just residential. So it's not a complaint about this, it's just a comment.
All right, okay, because on the site plan it clearly shows that there is public open space provided for these two units.
I wasn't questioning that, thank you.
And as for shadow diagrams, well, the planner has addressed the shadow diagrams and the potential impact through his report as not being of added concern, so it gave a full and extensive regarding that. And multiple dwellings, like in this case it is for visitor accommodation units, they can apply for it under the scheme. They have demonstrated that they can meet the certain aspects of the planning scheme. So I just wanted to make that known.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors, before I put the motion? Councillor Farmer.
There's just one comment that, as Councillor Wisby rightly pointed out, that's 0.6 on both of the units on the northern boundary, but as can be seen on the page 21, that the other buildings that on the block next door are quite away from the side boundary fence. It doesn't excuse the reason why they should be so close, but it's just a comment that you can see the distance between the two there from the boundary of the other houses on the other block.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Town planner, are you up with it to be able to respond to that?
Concern raised with this small setback here, not being compliant.
Yeah, through the mayor, I think there's a consistency throughout the area in terms of how other buildings are oriented to obtain the view, which is consistent with these. The setbacks are also quite similar across the surrounding areas as well, and it is the setback from the northern boundary, so it won't impact at all in terms of overshadowing or anything like that. And there's no issue being raised with that particular setback either.
Any further questions, councillors? I'll put the motion forward. All those in favour? So it's Councillor Woods, Councillor Steiner, Deputy Mayor, myself, Councillor Parker, Councillor Farmer, against Councillor Crawford and Councillor Wisby. Motion is passed. Thank you, councillors. Move on to agenda item 3.2. The Bicheno 18589 Tasman Highway, Bicheno, and the recommendation is on page 37. Someone care to move the recommendation? 32. 32, page 32. Right, yes, thank you.
Move that pursuant to section 56 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, permit SA 2014/08 be amended to delete part B of condition 8, and permit SA 2015/02 be amended to delete part B of condition 8.
We have a seconder for that motion, councillors. Councillor Steiner. It's open for discussion, councillors. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mayor Kent. The agenda for the council meeting tonight only refers to the Glamorgan Spring Bay interim planning scheme and its requirements relating to the dwellings, not the applicable requirements for subdivision, which is clearly the relevant consideration, as both the planning permits proposed to be amended relate to subdivisions and not the dwelling. The relevant provision in the interim scheme appears to have equivalent requirements to the former scheme for minimum and 80 hectare lots, farm management plans and a business plan relating to an existing non-agricultural use. Under the interim scheme, It is my belief that subdivision would not even be able to be approved by council. 26.5.1, new lots, objective to prevent further fragmentation and fettering of rural resource land. Acceptable solutions. I won't go for the acceptable solutions. The performance criteria is a lot must satisfy all of the following. Be no less than 80 hectares, have a frontage of no less than 6 metres, and I'll go on. We all know it's 20 hectare, basically 20 hectare lots. Under section 56(1) of LUPA, a council may only amend a permit with the consent of the landowner. I note the letter from Andy Hamilton that's in our agenda, and associates do not indicate that the owners of the land consent to the proposed amendment. All the letter states is that Andy Hamilton has discussed the amendments with Bruce Dunbarton and Derek Freeman. As a planning authority member, I've not received evidence of the owner's formal consent to the amendment. I also believe that the proposed amendments are not minor. Under section 56(2) of LUPA, the council must also be satisfied that the amendment, B, will not cause an increase in detriment to any person, and C, does not change the use or development for which the permit was issued, other than a minor change to the description or the use of the development. I think it is arguable that amendments proposed for the permits may result in the use class for the subdivisions changing from resource development to residential. Clause 8.2.2 of the interim scheme requires that a use or development that is directly associated with and subservient part of another use of the same site must be categorised into the same use class as the other. So removing the Part 5 agreement, removing from Part 5 agreements any requirement to have a farm management plan in place before the approval of the permit for the construction of a dwelling is arguably removing the only impediment that stops the use associated with the subdivision from being residential use rather than rural resource use. Even the planning report in the agenda itself notes there would be no further requirements to obtain a permit for resource development use. Therefore, if the change to the subdivision permit approved, the council would not be in any position to know whether a dwelling is a subservient part of the resource development use. I note that once the dwelling is constructed on the subdivided land, it would be difficult for council to force the owners to establish a resource development use. I note that the proposed amendments to the subdivision permits are utilising a loophole in the general time limit on development permits so as to allow the proposed subdivisions to enjoy all the benefits of the current interim scheme with respect to the construction of dwellings in the zone and none of the restrictions on the subdivisions. I would also argue that amendments will increase the detriment to other people in the following ways. It is removing an impediment that's applied under both the former and the interim planning schemes which prevented the sub-80 hectare division of land in the rural resource zone being residential and not resource development purposes. And for this reason, it is unfair to owners of similar properties who would not have been able to apply for any similar planning permits under either the former planning scheme or the interim scheme. Finally, the amendment will allow the subdivisions to proceed for purposes that are inconsistent with the zone purpose statements of the interim scheme, resulting in residential development not associated with the resource development activities. Councillors, you'll be aware that we've discussed this before, and some of the reasons. Remember, there was Barnard Street in Bicheno that had, they created in the early 2000s, all the blocks are 20 hectares in in agricultural rural land. The Barnard Road subdivision was going to be the food bowl of Bicheno. There's not been one agricultural on that land at all. And we also had the farm, the Abalone farm, that was done probably 20 years ago before I was on council, and that was to do, they've done the dwelling and nothing else has happened on that. So remember that part of those reasons was to try and actually stop those things from happening. If someone is going to do farming, they certainly need a farm management plan before they begin anyway. So I won't be supporting this because it's, in my view, it's not a minor amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Any other councillors' comments? Councillor Farmer?
I'd just like to ask the planner, how big is the actual block? I can't seem to find in total the actual subject site. How large is it? I think it was one said 27, one said 20 hectares.
Through the mayor, the two permits have a number of lots associated with them. They're all around, excluding balance lots, they're all around 20 to 25, 26 hectares in size.
So the overall lot's quite a large lot of land, the subject site mentioned on page 33. So it's quite a large block of land in total.
Was certainly 1502 is the Mayfield property. The Bishno property was probably an 80 or 90 hectare block prior to the subdivision.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention also while I'm speaking, there is, as it says on 9.5 on page 30, that things have moved on, I think, since the 94 plan regarding farming. It does mention the fact that farming can undertake, what's it called, viticulture, grapes. Don't need a large block of land to make, farming successful. The fact that there's quite a large dam on the property too, which on the properties which can be used, does allow that to happen too. So it's just a comment. I just didn't know how much the land was in total, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wisby?
Can I
Sorry.
just...
Talking, please. Councillor Wisby, you were next.
Mayor Kent, through you to the planner, was the Part 5 agreement actually entered into by council with the owners of the properties when the original subdivisions were approved?
For the 1502 permit, yes.
Not for both. The Part 5 was signed by...
1408, the Bishno one, is still a live permit. Haven't created titles for it yet.
So were the condition of the Part 5 agreement, that was a condition for both?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the Mayfield one, they signed the Part 5,
Yes.
but the 1408 won't be signed until the closer to title being issued.
Yeah, the normal process is if the permit requires a Part 5 agreement, that Part 5 agreement is signed as part of the process of sealing the final plan.
Okay, so in respect to the Mayfield one, I would think this is evidence that the terms of the Part 5 were not unjustified or considered too onerous to preclude the owners from because they signed up to them. The owners have not taken any steps to appeal the conditions at the time of the approval. And I do not regard this application as a minor amendment because by removing from the Part 5 agreements the requirements to have a farm management plan in place before the approval of a permit for the construction of a dwelling is basically turning this land into residential use. The original subdivision was approved on the condition that the land is used for agricultural activities. The decision and conditions were not appealed. The permit conditions were fair, and if council approves this application, I'm concerned that we're opening up the floodgates for many other similar requests to treat agricultural land the same as residential land. So I won't be supporting this today.
Thank you, Councillor Wisby. Planner?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just need to clarify a couple of matters, I think, from both Councillor Wisby and Councillor Crawford. Councillor Crawford mentioned that the current interim planning scheme doesn't allow subdivision below the 80 hectare rule. That's certainly true, but that does not in any way restrict council's ability to consider an amendment to a former permit, which is what we are doing. The recommendation is seeking to verify one part of the Part 5 agreement only, which is a term in terms of how houses are managed on the approved blocks of land. The Part 5 agreement, which is essentially, or the condition for a Part 5 agreement is essentially identical across the two permits. Has multiple components that relate to producing farm management plans, controlling when a dwelling may be built, which in no way restricts the ability to build a dwelling, and in no way affects a planning application for a house as part of an agricultural use. The specific part of the Part 5 agreement is saying that if there is to be a dwelling, it can only be built once the intensive agricultural activity has commenced, and I'll return to that point. The other parts of the Part 5 agreement generally relate to protecting native vegetation and controlling access. So we're only seeking to amend one part of that Part 5 agreement, which I think is particularly minor. The reason for the amendment request, which I support, is really one of what is reasonable. And looking through the original reports to council on both these amendments and the various reports that were submitted to those, in no part of the reports or from the council officer at the time or in the expert reports suggest that it was necessary to control the timing of when a house is built. So there's no particular justification in my mind looking at those reports for that. So what we have now is a planning scheme that says in the rural zone or the agricultural zone, you can apply to build a house, and council needs to be satisfied that that house is necessary for an agricultural use of some kind. What the Part 5 agreement is requiring is essentially that same test, but expanded to the extent that the dwelling can only be built once the intensive agricultural activity has commenced. And I think that's an unreasonable condition because it's impractical for, at one hand, council to give a planning permit that says, yes, we appreciate and understand the need for a house to be associated with an agricultural use on the property, but to say that you actually have to establish that agricultural use remotely. I'm sure you can appreciate, if you're trying to establish an agricultural operation anew, whether it's horticulture or viticulture or something like that, it takes a lot of time. You want to be on site. The planning, we can give a planning permit, and the Part 5 agreement doesn't stop that. It says you can have the house, it's just that you have to get the farm operational before you can build the house, which is, I think, just impractical in an agricultural sense. So that's the extent of the amendment sought. It's not seeking to verify any other terms. It is still be a requirement by the Part 5 agreement to submit a farm management plan. And I think I made the point in the report that that's quite an onerous requirement. Agricultural use for any other block of land does not need a farm management plan, does not need any evidence to council. Agriculture is a no permit required activity, which just recognises the fact that farmers can get on with it and farm. We're still under the revised Part 5 agreement. It would still require that farm management plan to be done, which I think that will provide a very high and very unusual degree of control over these blocks of land.
Thank you, Planner. Councillor Crawford, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kent. It was just clarification that Councillor Farmer was talking about how large the properties were, and I just thought that it's not about a subdivision. This actual, I just thought it was a bit confusing. It's not about the subdivision's already happened. It's just really about the Part 5. There's something that the planner said about, that it's expensive and that to do production of, farming, agriculture, whatever, which I understand very well, coming from a farming background. But it talks about substantial commencement. That doesn't mean you have to be in production. It actually means that you just need a farm management plan and that you actually have to have started to put that in, on the ground, So also councillors would have read about the Victorian about the regulation of agriculture and farm management plan that's making sense, because they've actually, perhaps Tasmania can learn from that, they've already actually lost a lot of their good agricultural land because of hobby farms, whatever. That's continues to happen here. Just one last point, when I mentioned about the Barnard Street road, at Bishno, well, a lot of those have got residents on. They were actually supposed to be the reason that they were allowed to be subdivided, less than the 80 hectare lots, and the 20 hectare lots was to be used for farming, and they had a farm management plan with that, of how that would be effective. But in effect, that hasn't happened at all. It's just into hobby farms, basically, with lots of residents on lots of those blocks now, no farming. So that's why I have a problem with removing that from this Part 5 that people have already agreed to.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Wisby.
Thanks, Mayor Kent. I think, through you to the planner, I think you said like it needed to be up and running, and I know Councillor Crawford just mentioned this, but it doesn't say it has to be up and running, the farm. All it says is substantial commencement of an intensive agriculture activity. That's what Council is satisfied, that a substantial commencement of an intensive agricultural activity has occurred. That doesn't mean it's up and running. It means they're serious, they've got a plan and they've actually started something. So, no, that's not what it actually says at the moment. It doesn't have to be up and running as the rules stand now. It's only substantial commencement.
Well,
that's all.
Through the Mayor, I think substantial commencement is... Look, I think that's really open to interpretation, which is not one of the other issues I've raised with the particular requirement. A substantial commencement of a house is putting some foundations down, which is sufficient to show that at some point that house is going to get finished. You wouldn't spend the money building the foundations. How you equate that to a particular agricultural operation, you'd have to work through the process on the individual basis. But let's, if you can equate building the foundations with building a third of a house or a half of a house, effort-wise, this council through the Part 5 agreement is asking for a lot of work to be put into an operation in the early stages from a remotely. It seems unreasonable and unnecessary to on one hand say the house is okay for that agricultural use, but only for the ongoing management and operation of the agricultural use, not for its establishment.
Thank you, Mr. Planner. Any further comment, questions from councillors before I put the motion? I put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Woods, Councillor Steiner, Deputy Mayor, myself, Councillor Farmer, 4, against, Councillor Wisby, Councillor Parker and Councillor Crawford. The motion is moved. Thank you, and recommended. Passed is the word I should use. Agenda item 3.3. Multiple purpose dwellings at 1 Aqua Sands, Swansea. Recommendation on page 37. Someone care to move that to be the recommendation? Move the recommendation, please. Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that pursuant to Section 17 of the Resource Management and Planning Appeal Tribunal Act 1993, Council agrees to a consent memorandum being endorsed by Council staff that has the effect of approving DA 2017/245, subject to the following conditions as per the original recommendations of 1 to 15.
There's a seconder for the motion, please, or the recommendation, I should say. Councillor Steiner. Open for discussion, councillors. Comment? No comment. I'll put the motion.
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor, before you go.
Councillor Farmer.
As you know, as you realise, we actually discussed this back at the last meeting on the 28th of November. And as you can see by the decision there, it was refused. We did speak about shortly after that what happens now, and there was going to be a discussion on mediation. I can't see any mediation report on this DA, on this application. I asked the planner through you, Mr Mayor, has there been some mediation, and if so, what was discussed in the mediation?
Through the Mayor, an appeal has been lodged. Normally, the procedures for an appeal is to hold a directions hearing and then schedule a date for mediation. The directions hearing hasn't occurred yet, but we've been requested by the developer to, given the timeframes around this time of year and the distance to our next council meeting, which would be 6 weeks away, to request to consider the mediation now, which is earlier than normal process, but that doesn't in any way restrict council's ability to consider it. In terms of the mediation, they're asking that it be approved on its original basis.
I disagree with that. That was actually called mediation, but thank you, Mr Mayor.
Further comment, councillors? Councillor Crawford?
Thank you, Mayor Kent. I won't be supporting this again today because I think it should be refused for the following reasons. Most of those discussed in the report, but the front setback to the primary frontage in Old Spring Bay Road, the proposed development is not compatible with the setback of the dwellings in the street, and that's clause 10.4.2, performance 1A, and furthermore may create a precedent for the vacant blocks. We've seen on that. Number 2, the reason the private open space of the proposed development is not compatible in that it is not orientated to take advantage of the sunlight, which is clause 10.4.3 P2.2. And the third reason is the front fence of the proposed dwelling is not compatible with the performance criteria as it does not allow for mutual passive surveillance between the road and the dwelling. Clause 10.4.7 P1A. Furthermore, the height and transparency of the proposed fence is not compatible with others in the street, which is clause 10.4.7 P1B. So I'm still not supporting this. I don't think things have changed, and they might be minor, but we're actually seeing what's happening is more and more developments and residents and built. That's why the performance criteria are there. So I can't support this still today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wisby?
Thanks, Mayor Kent. So in the report, it actually referred council to, or the planning authority to an RMPAT practice directions in respect to how to word when we refuse an application. So by what Councillor Crawford was reading then, that sounded, from my examples that I've printed and read, that sounded like the adequate grounds of appeal. Of refusal. It appears that what Councillor Crawford just read would actually cover what we need to actually put forward as grounds for refusal. I also won't be supporting this today. It's back exactly how it was, but if the vote is to refuse again, I assume we could actually put the grounds of refusal today in as what Councillor Crawford has read, because it is an application again in its own right, isn't it?
Town planner?
Through the Mayor, it's not a new application as such. The purpose of the report is to consider the mediation request. If it does go no, then yes, there would be an opportunity to clarify the original grounds, which were very light on.
Mayor Kent, I'd also like to thank the planner for bringing our attention as the planning authority to actually this example on, you know, we're not planners, but actually how we have to write something up to be valid. So it's a really good piece of information for us to have 3 years on in me being a councillor. Excellent. So, yep, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment from councillors? Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Being that I was one of the councillors that voted against this when it was brought to council last month, and listening to the discussions around the table, and also having had a conversation with the planner, that's my phone, excuse me. Sorry, my apologies. Through you to the planner, and I know that it may irk Councillor Crawford to some degree, but can you answer some of the concerns that Councillor Crawford and Councillor Wisby may have, so that we can all get clarification with regards to their concerns and yours?
Yes, through the Mayor. I concur with Councillor Crawford that the fence as originally proposed was too high and was inconsistent with the street, which is why there was a condition to lower the height of that in the original recommended set of recommendation. In terms of the private open space, there is a private open space, the variation requested. That's not in terms of the siting. So the private open space is proposed on the north side of the buildings and the site. Realistically, they can't do anything more if they want to gain sun than put it in the northern part of the site. The variation for private open space is only in terms of it not being accessible from a habitable room, which is not possible in this case because it's a 2-storey structure and they have their living rooms upstairs. So, yes, the application is put forward with a number of discretions, but in my opinion, they certainly meet the performance criteria. This type of development is essentially exactly what is envisaged by the planning scheme. Multiple dwellings are to be expected in the general residential zone. They do meet the density provisions, so it's not a case of squeezing in too many. It meets that particular test of the planning scheme. So the variations were, I think, minor, in my opinion.
Councillor Woods.
If I may, Mr Mayor, you often say when you talk back to, or give your answers back to council about, in your opinion, what do you actually base? What qualifications do you have to base your opinion on? For clarification, from me.
For clarification, I've been a land use planner for 10 plus years, working for across most councils in southern Tasmania by now, and I have a master's degree in town planning. And when I say my opinion, I take into account what's reasonable and what's not. And whilst every application is judged on its merits, reasonableness comes from what the planning scheme is trying to do and what the performance criteria are trying to set out to achieve. And I think by reference to what the planning scheme objectives are, the criteria, and what sort of development you would expect to see in Swansea, that the proposal's more than fine. It's appropriate.
Thanks, Town Planner. Any further comment, councillors? No further comment, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Woods, Councillor Steiner, Deputy Mayor, myself, Councillor Parker. Against, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Wisby and Councillor Farmer. The motion is passed. Thank you, councillors. Under Regulation 25 of Local Government Meeting Procedures, Regulation 2005, the chairperson hereby declares that the council is no longer acting as a planning authority under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 for sections 3 of the agenda.
I'll move the council no longer acts as a planning authority, Mr Mayor.
I'll second it. Councillor Woods, all those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. 5:45. Thank you very much. Public question time. Over to you, Sue.
I'm just wondering about the mowing of the nature strips in Tribana. Will the contractors be around before Christmas, because some of them are getting very, very long?
Would you like to comment on that, please, Tony?
Through the chair.
Pollard?
The mowing program is running as per normal for this time of the year, with the grasses growing so much. It's a 7-week cycle for the southern section. They start in Tribana, they go and do Barton Avenue, Orford, East and West Shelley, Spring Beach, Buckland, and then they come back to Tribana. So it's a 7-week cycle. At the moment, the whole round's been finished. I've just sent them back to do the main street of Tribana and the main street of Orford. And last week they had finished the northern side of the Tasman Highway in Tribana, and tomorrow they start on the southern side. So they're starting in the southern side tomorrow morning, and they should have that knocked over by Christmas, and then they'll move on to Orford straight after Christmas.
Thanks very much, Sue. Thank you. Agenda item 5, information reports. Comment? Councillor Wisby.
Thanks, Mayor Kent. Through you to Mr Pollard. Has council received many complaints about the mowing? Because I certainly have, about the length of the grass, how the towns are looking. They're not looking like they used to look and what we used to enjoy. So one, is have we received many complaints? And 2, what was our mowing cycle? Because I know grass is growing quicker now, but I can't recall the towns looking so untidy ever when we were doing it.
Mr Mayor, before Mr Pollard answers, I have to completely support Councillor Wisby in that. I've had numerous complaints from residents right across the municipal area, not just here in Tribana, about the state of the towns at the moment. I totally support Councillor Wisby in her comments.
And can I just mind if I add to that? I was going to... yeah,
Are
thank
you
you.
referring
Yeah,
to all
that.
councillors?
Yes, yeah.
Thank
I was going to bring it up, question without notice, but I honestly don't think 2 people can do it. And that's not criticisms to 2 gentlemen that are doing it. A company cannot have a contract to have 2 people doing it the way it's being done at the moment. Up my place, they came last week and they mowed 2 strips and went again. 2 strips, and I was absolutely disgusted at the amount of people I've had into work saying how bad Orford and Tribana look at the moment. I have to agree with them. It's not a good sight at the moment.
Okay, so councillors, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, there's been a contract let for 2 years or thereabouts. So all I could suggest at this stage, Mr Pollard, is that you revisit it and see if there are any opportunities for movement, or whether we have to support the people that are doing it to get them to do more time. It's something that you'll have to have a look at and advise us at the next meeting in January. I think that's about the best we can do at this stage.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that through the chair. When we were doing it, council, it was done by 2 staff. They were getting over that whole southern program in 7 weeks. They're currently doing 2 people over 7-week program. So nothing's changed, except we always have a 2 month sort of window when we get into accelerated growth. But the towns should be presentable very soon. It's just the 7-week delay from starting in Tribunna and finishing in Buckland and coming back. But it's always been done by 2 people in a 7-week program.
Councillor Steiner?
Mr Mayor, may I just add that there are also, or there appear to be strips that just aren't mowed now. They're just left.
Yes.
So I think it's selective mowing. I don't know whether they're trying to, you know, do the main part and leave certain parts, but it's certainly looking untidy everywhere, including Buckland.
Yeah, just on that through the Mayor, they've just finished 1 full round. It's their first round within the contract. So there are a few things that are going to be addressed at our first meeting. We'll sort of let them go a little bit to let them settle in and work out what's going on. They got full maps on where they were supposed to mow, and we'll address a few things like when they shift to a new town, they'll be doing the highways first and then working out from there. So the further you live off the highway, the later it's going to be within that program for that town, just to pick up these high profile areas first. But there's a number of things that we'll be discussing with them at the end of their first program, but I'm sure it will settle down nicely.
Deputy Mayor?
Mr Mayor, if I may, to Mr Pollard, can you also discuss with them the state of the blades of their mowers? Because as someone who has had significant experience with small engines, I don't think their equipment is quite up to where it should be.
Councillor Wisby?
Thank you, Mayor Kent. I'm not sure if you can answer this or Mr Pollard, but on page 59, it states, this is for the Visitor Information Centres, it states income slightly below budget at this stage, and it's below budget by not much, like $13,000. But in the report it says visitor numbers are up 37% on last year, like visiting the information centres. So I don't understand it, just, you know,
Yep.
more people are in and numbers are down, like income's down. I just was wondering how that's come about.
I'm sorry, I'll take that on notice. I have no idea.
Yep.
Pollard? No.
And-
Unfortunately, I can't.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And my other comment was, in my opinion and that of many others, the inadequacy of the fencing at Prosser, you know, at the new work area at the Prosser. I know that hasn't been handed to council yet as a council responsibility, but as an elected member or elected members, I think we do have a responsibility to the safety of our residents and ratepayers and visitors to our area. We have spoken about this, Mayor Kent, on the phone initially, but my question is whether or not, sorry, I'll just go back one step. Looking down from my house on that beach area, you see a lot of people on the wrong side of the flags.
Highlighted, no doubt, by the TV coverage. But unfortunately, the signs are being made, the rope is being extended, and it's all taking a couple of days to do. We have that in writing from Mast, so it's all happening. And as you rightly say, from a council perspective, all we can do is do the best we can when we hear from people that they have a concern. So there are more signs being made, there are more rope-offs, we can't do any more. And we all know that the site, nobody should be there, but they go there to have a look because of what's all the problems. We're going to have a look. So they don't take any notice of the ropes, they don't take any notice of the signs. What would you expect council to do from here?
Oh, that's a question to me. So my answer to that would be,
Sure.
I mean, just across the way, well, there's two lots of fencing up. One is the vacant block of land next to Councillor Parker's shop that has, you know, the security fencing for worksite, and also around the contractor's building there was the, you know, the fencing for a worksite fencing.
Yeah.
So I would have thought that type of fencing, as ugly as it is, would be more suitable fencing than the flags and the string.
Okay.
That's what I would have thought. So I'm just letting you know that as a representative, the complaints and concerns are flowing through. And my question to you was, are council going to write to Marsden request sturdier fencing to be put up, because, as you say, the string and flags aren't working?
We have written, we have made requests.
For that, okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't want to take either sides here. I see it virtually from the time I get to work till I go home at night, what's happening down there. An example this morning was the excavators are down on the northern side digging out where the pontoon starts from, the sandbags start from where the beach is. And I was actually watched them out the window there today, and two adults walked past straight up to where the guys were actually using the excavators digging, and virtually metres away from them. And I really don't know how you're going to stop that. It's just, yeah.
Well, it's a site under construction. I have no answer to that either. So all we can do is the best we can, talk to the people, get them to understand the community's problems and work it out from there. So I can't say any more about it. Thank you. Any other comments on the General Manager's reports? Councillors, Councillor Farmer.
Yeah, just one, just referring back to the visitor centre at Tribunna, I take it, as Councillor Worsby said, 37% increase. I take it that any person who goes into the VIC to buy a ferry ticket is counted as a visitor to the visitor centre. I presume that's why the numbers are up so much, because beforehand they used to buy the tickets in the shelter at the wharf where they didn't go in the visitor centre, so I presume that might be the case, that the increase in numbers but not the increase in income, because we're not getting the income from that. Well, we might be getting some.
My understanding is we're getting some income, but what the figure is,
yeah, it's very hard to predict.
well, we can find out, but I mean, it's not substantial by any stretch of the imagination.
They buy something while they're waiting for the ferry. But on another matter, on page 70, I just want to direct a question to the planner, if I could. As you can see, there's 9 applications, some approved and some still in progress, regarding visitor accommodation. I take it they're all, apart from one there is land, they're all permitted under the scheme at the present time. Can you just explain why that is the case? They don't come before council. Do they have a strict guideline they have to?
Yeah, through the mayor. So if they are sited basically within a town boundary, it's in a residential zone, they are regulated by a planning directive from the state government, which is was introduced to implement their visitor accommodation policy, and basically says if you wish to rent out part of your main house, you can do so and it's exempt from planning approval. If you wish to rent out your investment property, you will need a permit from council, but provided that the house is less than 300 square metres, it will be a permitted application. So this is why they're all pretty much permitted. The only change really through this planning directive, which is a document that comes in and sits on top of the planning scheme and overrides it. The only real change is that the former rule was permitted up to 160 square metres of floor area. The government increased that to 300 square metres. And we did find that we used to do a lot of discretionary applications of probably around 180 square metres of floor area. So it's now they've been brought down to a permitted process. The numbers themselves are probably no different than normal. They'd be trending as general as I normally would. There's always a number every month seeking a permit.
Thank you. Councillor Wisby.
Sorry, just a quick one. Page 71, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up from the bottom to the planner. 1 Charles Street, Tribana shop.
Yep.
Where's that?
1 Charles Street is the hotel, and the approvals for a little pop-up chandlery.
Chandlery.
Yeah.
Fishing chandlery.
Yeah. So selling tackle and other bits and bobs in a little pop-up van. I think it's 2 or 3 days a week is the plan. Testing the market for that kind of business.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on the General Manager's report, councillors? No further questions. The recommendation that the management reports be received and noted. Thank you. Agenda item 6, minutes of section 24 committees. Any comments from any councillor with the reports that are there, apart from the ones that are requiring a decision from us? Nope. Councillor Farmer.
Just an unusual question. I see Constable Brett Steiner is on the committee for the Tribana Recreation Ground on page 93. There's quite an income that came in there in the last month or so, 19,500. I just wondered where's all that coming from? It's a good income. I'm not criticising it, but if we can keep that up, we're going well.
Taste community. Can I help you?
No, through you, Mr Mayor, I think that was the council fund, the 10.5 or whatever that council annually contribute to the clubs. And then there was some money that was transferred from an old account that was, I don't know, a few years old.
So
Of course, there's the Tas Community Fund that's been...
So following on from that, on the next page, I see they're going to do some irrigation, Tas irrigation. So I presume that money will come out of that fund.
Yep.
Right. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 7, officers' reports requiring a decision.
Mayor, I'll move that council approves the 2018 ordinary meeting of council dates and venues as detailed in the report, page 96.
Second for that. Councillor Woods. All those in favour? Councillor Farmer?
No, just all those in favour.
Oh, sorry. Right, I thought you wanted a question.
No.
Like to discuss? Move
Yes.
to discuss?
Yep.
I'd like to see the council go back to not every back to the way it originally was, but I do honestly think that we should be having one meeting, Swansea, Bishno and Coles Bay and Buckland. It gives the people, even though I know we're filmed here, it gives the people the opportunity to actually go to a council meeting in those towns. I'd like to see it go back to one meeting in each one of those towns.
Thank you. Any further comment, question? Councillor Crawford?
Thank you, Mayor Kent. I support Councillor Parker on that. I've talked about it every year. I talk about it since we've had all the meetings in Tribana. It's not only just for access for the ratepayers to us, it's also an opportunity for councillors to actually spend that day and have a look around at some of the works that have been done and some that perhaps need doing. So just in a bit of a way of engagement with the communities as well. So I would actually propose that we do actually have Bishno, Buckland, Coles Bay and Swansea, and we actually do it probably when in the summer when there's plenty of light, you know, so probably 2 in, say, January and March, and then the other 2 in perhaps, you know, October and December or November. And December, perhaps December could be in Swansea with the AGM, like we used to have that, it's more central. So, because there is a motion on the floor at the moment, I'll just say that I'm not supporting, and that's the reason I'm not supporting, because I think we need to get a better connection with the other communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I
Councillor
may.
Woods.
I understand and hear what Councillor Parker and Councillor Crawford are saying, and I support it to a degree. However, the venues of the places that we used to go to is almost impossible, especially Buckland and Swansea, with the acoustics in the halls there. It was almost impossible to hear. So, if there was possibly a better place to go, I may support it, but given the fact that we got Swansea's hall and Buckland's hall as a venue, it's nigh impossible to hear anything in there. So that's just a comment.
Okay, so Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mayor Cantwell. In Swansea, I would assume that the old council chambers that we used for years would probably be available, with people working on that, and certainly has been used in the past, and the acoustics there are quite good. With Buckland as well, maybe shift to their side room. Their side room is probably not much smaller than this room here, so usually get a lot of people attend at Buckland as well, but you know, there are things that ensure that there is a venue available, that we could find one.
So, if I understand the meeting dates, so nobody at this point in time objecting to the meeting dates. What some are objecting to is where they're held. So can we resolve the issue that the meeting dates are acceptable or not?
Mr Mayor, we have to resolve, we have to make a decision in relation to the actual meetings. Can I just remind Council that for about a year we actually monitored the number of people who were attending our meetings when we went to other venues. And I will recall a meeting we had in Coles Bay. There were no people from Coles Bay in the gallery. In fact, the only people in the gallery were 2 people who lived in Triabunna. And we then made a decision that perhaps live streaming was a way that we would be able to give our community a better opportunity to watch our council meetings and to actually be in the council meeting. We've gone ahead and implemented that process. I would still support the continuation of the live streaming and not actually changing the venue.
Councillor Wisby.
Mayor Kent, I certainly have heard, and what Deputy Mayor Arnold said is also correct, but after just recently going to Bishno for a Community Connect session, there was 30 people there. I think there could have been more there. You know, a lot of people didn't know it was on. And it was a really good opportunity to talk to the local people, as the Deputy Mayor would agree, and Councillor Woods and Councillor Crawford. But maybe if we can't get meetings up there, maybe we can actually commit as a council to having, you know, putting the second Tuesday of the month when we used to regularly have workshops, but actually do a road trip and actually go up and see the communities and have a community connect, not just in the year leading up to the election, have it, you know, every year, you know, because it is a great opportunity. And there was talk when I first came on council that was going to do a bus trip and actually have a look at council's assets and you know, the good stuff, the bad stuff and all that. That never happened. So I think, yeah, at a minimum, council actually needs to commit to, you know, going to these municipalities and talking to the people, you know, on a day that suits them, like we did on Wednesday. Oh, sorry, at Bicheno, on whatever day that was.
Whatever day it was.
On Monday.
Any further comment, councillors? So, again, the decision, has anybody put a motion? If we put the motion up to...
Yes.
We have, who?
I moved it.
You moved it,
I
did you?
moved it, it was seconded by councillor Woods.
Okay,
So we just
so
need to put the
all
motion.
those in favour with the motion that was, or the recommendation that was put forward? Councillor Woods, Councillor Steiner, Deputy Mayor, myself, Councillor Parker, for, against?
I think councillor Farmer was for, councillor.
Was for, yeah.
Yeah, it was for, yeah.
And
Councillor
Councillor
Crawford,
Wisby's for.
Against, it's against.
for
No.
or against?
I'm for.
You're for, I'm
Yep.
sorry. Councillor
Start again.
Start again. Mr.
Sorry,
Mayor.
start again, to get it right. Councillor Woods for, Councillor Steiner for, Deputy Mayor for, myself for, Councillor Wisby for, Councillor Farmer for, against, Councillor Parker, Councillor Crawford. The motion is moved and passed. Thank you. Okay.
I'd just like that noted, please, that I voted against that because I think that we should.
Well, both will be noted, those against.
No, but I'm actually noted the reasons that I actually voted against that.
Yeah. Ms Turvey, you've got those reasons that Councillor Crawford.
And myself.
Done, all my-
Pardon? Okay, agenda item 7.2, policy, council audio visual. No, we've done that, fella, have we not? Yeah. 7.3, voluntary council amalgamation.
You need
No.
to deal with 7.2.
7.2, I missed it.
Yes. Mr Mayor, I'll move that policy 6.2, council meetings, audiovisual recording and live streaming as presented to council on the 12th of December 2017 be endorsed by council.
I second that.
Second, councillor Steiner. Any further discussion, councillors? No further discussion? Moved and unanimous, thank you.
Gonna do this
Move it.
Still going to move it, rightio. Councillor Woods, Deputy Mayor,
recommendation.
Councillor Steiner, Councillor Crawford, myself, Councillor Parker, Councillor Wisby, Councillor Farmer. Thank you. Unanimous.
The policy.
Okay, yeah, just.
7.3, voluntary council amalgamations. The recommendation is on page 107.
Mr Mayor, could I just make a comment here? I believe that this should be in two parts. I don't believe that part 5 of this recommendation should be part of the original motion. I don't have a problem with part 5 being in there because of the support for the Bicheno community, but I think that we need to deal with the motion in relation to what the terms of reference were for the reports that were done in relation to the 4 councils, and then add number 5 as things. So I would like to see this motion done in 2 parts, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then part 5 as a separate motion.
I'll support that.
And I would like to see them, the recommendations, if anyone's going to move them as motions, are split 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 5, not in lumps. Yeah, individually, because you might actually want to receive and note the results, but you might not actually want to vote for any of the others
Okay. All
as
right.
well, so I just think it doesn't really, you know.
Any other councillors have any comment?
Mayor Kent, I'm happy to split them, split them, that's good.
Individually?
Mr Mayor, I'll move that council resolves to receive and note the results of the community consultation regarding voluntary council amalgamation, South East Council's feasibility study 2016.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Stein. Open for discussion.
Well, I think, Mr Mayor, we should resolve the motion that we have at the time. We split them into 5 separate recommendations.
Motion, it was just a comment.
No.
Mr Mayor, if I may, it wasn't a motion, councillor Farmer, it was a suggestion which councillor Crawford took up, so expanded on this suggestion. So we're now dealing with 1 to 5 as individual motions.
Could I speak on it just for a short time? It says on page 102 that they had the community information sessions. Unfortunately, I was away in the state at that time and didn't get to them. Were those reports made public at the end of the day? I mean, there was the chair and, as I say, there was 2 councillors on there plus the general manager. Was there any reports made public on what those community consultations recommended or come up with?
I don't believe so.
No.
Mr. Herbie, can you recall?
No, they weren't. It was very much a qualitative download from the chairperson who ran the panel discussions. So it wasn't a quantitative result,
Right.
and it was her views on the different groups' opinions.
Thank you.
And I take it on page 107 when it said on number 3 of the recommendation, due diligence. I take it there'll be several terms of references that will be broken into regarding doing the due diligence, like in relation to, debt of the councils, etc. Some councils carry debt, some councils don't. I mean, that's a thing that in the rating system we have here. Would that be included in the terms or in the terms of reference under due diligence? Would those type of things be included?
My understanding that they were.
That's not dealing
No?
I think we just need to go back to 1 and maybe discuss that when
When
we
the time
get to
comes.
3. It's just,
Yeah.
but, yeah.
So we'll just speak on 1.
Yeah, I think it's,
It makes it difficult because I was going to comment on several things within the actual survey, but
Yeah.
it's up to you, Mr Mayor, if I'm...
Well, the motion's up at this stage, so we've got to deal with the motion. So, all those in favour of the recommendation?
Oh, the motion.
Of 1.
The council resolves to receive and note the result of the community consultation regarding voluntary council membership. So Councillor Woods, Councillor Steiner, Councillor Crawford, Deputy Mayor, myself, Councillor Parker, Councillor Wisby, Councillor Farmer. Resolved unanimously. Thank you. Now, further comment? Nope. So, okay, so
I'll
Jen-
move, Mayor Kent,
change number 2, thank you.
that council resolves to continue with the voluntary amalgamation process.
Okay, have a seconder? All those in favour?
Talk.
speak.
Oh, first, sorry, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Councillor Crawford.
I'm not actually really sure what that means. Need some clarification. Resolves to continue with the voluntary amalgamation process, like what process, or it's too ambiguous. So I can't actually vote for it, even speak to it, because it's really ambiguous. I'm wondering even if we need to. I know it's a live motion, but just wondering whether the others don't cover it in a way, but
The only thing that I could probably throw in there, of course, is Clarence, by and large, have determined that they're not in. They've gone with a city area, so I guess that leads to the question of the process continuing with Sorrel. No?
No.
You don't think so, Deputy Mayor?
I don't, Mr Mayor, no, I'm sorry.
All right.
I think, Councillor Crawford, the voluntary amalgamation process, I think by splitting this motion, and yes, I agree with you in the initial stages, but reading here through, the process is actually then set out in 3 and 4. So that the voluntary amalgamation process was started with the South East Council's feasibility study, this huge big document. And so now the next step of the process is that council needs to resolve to request the minister to undertake the review, and that we will then take into account all the matters in accordance with Section 214A of the Local Government Act. So part 2 is, or part 3 and 4 actually supports part 2. That motion, because that is the voluntary amalgamation process. Now, well, I believe that 3 and 4 actually sets out the voluntary amalgamation process. Mr Mayor, Councillor
Yeah,
Steiner.
I'm sorry, Councillor Steiner.
Can I just add that, is it possible to deal with number 2 after 3 and 4? Because that seems logical to me, to discuss the process before we actually vote on whether to continue or not.
Other comments on that?
Mayor Kent, I'm quite confused. So that's a funny line, number 2, the one I moved, right?
Yeah.
But I'm quite confused because it states on page 103 that the response rate was 13%.
Yep.
Now, that can't be 13% of all residents and ratepayers. So it went out to everyone in some form. And don't we have like 4,000 ratepayers, 4,300 odd ratepayers? That's the 13%, not resident. And it talks in here that the information we were gathering were from residents and ratepayers. So, and I think it's maybe around 50%, ratepayers that live here, 50% that don't, okay? But then you've also got the residents. So I don't actually know what the actual split is, but the 13% from my figures only actually represents the ratepayers, right? So let's say it was 50-50 of residents and ratepayers. One could say that's only like a 6.5% response rate. If you understand what I mean, like if we're asking everybody, residents and ratepayers, that would be more like, I would think, around 8,000 people, and that doesn't equate to 13%. The 13% comes from around 4,400 people.
Yes, but that's correct, if I may, Mr Mayor, that's correct, because the population of Glamorgan Spring Bay is 4,660, or somewhere around there.
Ratepayers.
Right, well, for the population, yeah.
Oh, the total
Population.
Yeah, the
The
population.
ratepayers, yeah, the rate, because we're under 5,000, we're under the 5,000 threshold in terms of a local government area.
So what we're referring to there is this represents a response rate of 13% of people who reside in...
4,660.
that reside, because it doesn't actually say that. It talks about offering all residents and ratepayers the opportunity to have a voice, but then the rate we're going to use is just the ones that live here permanently.
No.
The 13%.
I'll have to, Mr Mayor, I think
I
this,
don't know.
we'll probably get
My
this.
being pedantic on this point is, if it's not reflective of all residents and ratepayers, regardless of if they live here or not, if that number is not representative of that, then it's not 13%. And then, if it's not 13%, it just seems too small a figure for us to make a decision on. My understanding is going forward that once we hand this on to the minister, and that the local government board do a review, then that recommendation goes back to the minister and the minister actually makes the decision, not council. So it basically It won't be a council decision after this point.
I was at, if I may, Mr Mayor, I was at Southern Tasmanian Council's meeting yesterday for the Mayor. My understanding from that is that the report comes back to council and council gets to make the ultimate decision.
That's it. That's my understanding as well.
Can we just...
With the Act, like just, a point of clarification, the Act's not what the Act says. So the Act actually says that the local government board reports to the minister, and then their recommendations is the minister actually ask, council can actually put a submission and say what they think about the recommendation, but the final and only decision, according to the Act, depending, is up to the minister to make that final decision. So he can accept or reject the recommendations according to the Act. So, and that's what happened last time as well. So
I would totally agree with you, Councillor Crawford, but the information that was given yesterday at Southern Tasmanian Council's meeting was that councils would get the opportunity to make the decision after the report's made. So I can only convey that. And also, as the Mayor did start to say earlier, Clarence City Council have decided or will decide. Their community survey was a resounding no against amalgamation with merging with these three under this South East Council's feasibility study. So it's really only now down, despite the fact that the majority of people that responded supported this for councils. We can, now that can no longer be part of the process. I don't believe, because Clarence City Council's not going to be part of it. Not going to be part of the process. They favour a strategic alliance, which is what they've been talking about, the Greater Hobart Act, I think it's called, Greater Hobart Act, rather than a merging of the city councils.
Mayor Kemp, sorry, and just the other point too is when we was in Bicheno, and it came up about this matter, the survey that was done, it was said that the comments and so forth would be provided because there was an area where comments could be provided. So my concern is we've got a few sheets with some figures on it, but we didn't get any comments, you know what I mean? We didn't actually get the report or the feedback, as right, Councillor Farmer, the feedback that I'd actually would have liked to have heard and seen, you know. And also there seems to be some, we're not really sure, like, Deputy Mayor Arnold said at a meeting she was told X, Councillor Crawford saying the Local Government Act says Y. Yep. I think we really need clarification on what the process is. So, Mayor Kent, just based on all those, we don't know really, things that just came up, I'd like to move a procedural motion that Council defers making a decision on voluntary amalgamation to allow the matter to be workshopped, clarification sought on process, and full survey details provided.
Point of order, that's not a procedural motion, that is actually a motion. The only part of a procedural motion can be that
I'm sorry, I've done it again.
Afraid so, Councillor Westby.
Thank you. Sorry, that we defer the matter. Sorry, I think I've explained myself well enough leading up and that long motion. So that we defer the matter until next council meeting.
I'll second that, Mr Mayor. Can I also make a comment because I second it?
Yes.
I don't know, not on a procedural motion.
It's
the only decision.
back to procedural motion now.
Procedural motion, yep.
So can we discuss that motion?
No.
No. It's a procedural motion is basically that Councillor Wisby has put is that we defer until the next meeting. That's when the discussions can be taken.
You have to put the motion.
I'll second that anyway, Mr Mayor.
Okay, any further discussion?
No, there can't be.
Okay, so fair, I'll put the motion. No.
It's confusing. It's confusing.
Right.
That's right.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour with the motion? Councillor Woods, Councillor Steiner, Councillor Crawford, Deputy Mayor, myself, Councillor Parker, Councillor Wisby, Councillor Farmer. Unanimous. Thank you very much.
Well done, Debbie.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor Arnold, did it again.
Okay, there we go. Item 4. Old Swansea Courthouse and Council Offices. Comments?
Mayor, I'll move that council receives and notes the Swansea Courthouse Management Committee terms of reference and the list of Swansea Courthouse Management Committee members as presented.
Second. Councillor Woods.
Thank you.
Open for discussion. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mayor Kent. Just I spoke to the chair this morning, and perhaps in the Deputy Mayor Arnold's as a local government advisor, there was just a couple of things I thought that needed to be noted, perhaps, and added in this. So I'm happy to just
I'll just clarify for Councillor Crawford, I am not there as Deputy Mayor Arnold, I am there as Cheryl Arnold, community member with an interest in the Swansea Courthouse.
yes.
And I was allocated, if you like, that portfolio, for want of a better word. So I'm not sitting
Yes,
on.
I understand that. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Arnold. Perhaps I'll, Mayor Kent, I will actually speak to Mrs Arnold after the meeting and suggest that she might like to add. I'm worried about the chair on page 112. This has been a bit pedantic, but I'd just like to have it noted that perhaps the committee might like to add, if both are unavailable, the chair will be elected from the those present. The other problem I had is on the concern, I suppose, is on the bottom of page 112, replacing the committee members, just to be that should be advertised, just exactly the same as it is, but that position advertised, because it really needs to be advertised. And also the other thing that I brought up with the chair that we're going to look at is the adoption of the terms of the membership, and it talks about at the general meeting about the re-election. Stand for re-election and to be held, okay, but there isn't anything in this that says who can vote. So whether that's a general ratepayer because it is a council property or whatever, so that just needs a bit of clarification. So.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, please? And please excuse my ignorance if I am ignorant. But is this a Section 24 Committee of Council? No. Thank you.
Mayor Kent, just on another little pedantic there, just reminded me that it says shall meet monthly at a time suitable for all members to attend. I think that's nearly impossible to achieve. So if it's a terms of reference, they might want to change the word to majority or something of members, because you don't want to not be able to have a meeting if everyone can't attend.
Okay.
Mr Mayor, Mr Mayor, can I just make a comment on this? I'm really happy to see that the committee has elected a management committee. They've got a terms of reference, and I just hope that they continue to build on that and function and achieve what they have set out to achieve within that time frame.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Steiner. So the recommendation is?
It's already been moved. You need to just put the motion.
Yeah, okay, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Woods, Councillor Steiner, Councillor Crawford, Deputy Mayor, myself, Councillor Parker, Councillor Wisby, Councillor Farmer. Thank you, unanimously approved. Thank you. We have the tracking, I think is the next one. Right, saying that? Agenda item 8, motion tracking document.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, can I just ask a question there regarding the review of the CFest 2016? Has there been any progress? I was asked the other day, could I ask this question from a member of the public as to where the council sit and where the future is regarding the CFest? Have the council had any discussions with community groups, or what's their future?
Had a brief discussion with Mrs Lana Turvey a couple of weeks ago, and there's still a little bit being done. Work in progress, I suppose, is the easier way to put it, but it's not, in my view, looking all that good from outside interest, apart from what the council were doing previously. Does that help? Because that's where it's at.
Well, I was led to believe there was some outside interest, but they'd like to have the council's support and in kind and otherwise. But there was a committee by, I think Mr Jim Playstead was talking about forming a committee, but you haven't heard anything to that effect?
My understanding is that they never come back. So that was the last conversation I had. And there was a couple of other blokes or people, as you quite rightly. So.
Okay, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any further on the motion? Tracking document? Okay, agenda item 9. Questions?
Mr Mayor, I don't have a question. What I have is I need to pass on some thanks from the Glamorgan Spring Bay Historical Society. I attended the launch of Houses and Estates of Old Glamorgan this morning. It's a book that was authored by Malcolm Ward, Maureen Martin-Ferris and Tully Brooks. It's an absolutely magnificent book, just amazing. It's been extensively researched and referenced, and absolutely magnificent photos in it. So if you get the opportunity to have a look at it, I know they are on sale at the Historical Society. But the members of the Historical Society asked me to pass on to Council their thanks for Council's continued support of the Glamorgan Spring Bay Historical Society. It's very much a important part of our municipal area, with the rich history we have in our municipal area, and they are in a position to be able to document that, and they do fully appreciate the support that Council gives not only the Heritage Museum but the Historical Society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 9, questions without notice. Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regards to Clarence City Council moving out of the talks with regards to the amalgamation, the Southeast Councils, the Greater Southeast Council, or whatever it was called, where does that now leave the survey that was done with regards to it being part of the questions that were raised within the survey? So we've gone and done this this survey's been done, and we've got the responses back from people, and it was including Clarence Council. Now Clarence Council have now said no, they're not going to come on board. So where does that leave that survey?
Well, an interesting point. One can make assumptions, and that's all one can do. You've got people out there that want it or they don't want it. And, you know, it's a big and a bold question. You could say, well, whatever the percentage is, all they wanted was amalgamations and didn't care who it was with. Vice versa. I mean, that's, who knows? So this is part of the ongoing process now. And that's why we need to do some more work on it and see to where from here. But I suspect the outcome wouldn't be much difference. That's me, Pete. Now, you make your own views from there. Because the overall is, and we've said it before, 29 councils, la-da-da-da-da, you've heard it all before. Yes, the bigger savings in Greater Hobart, Greater Launceston, whatever, That's where the big dollars are with 4 GMs, 4 planners and all that sort of business. That's on the aldermen and the wages and the structures and all the rest of it. By the time they get to the rural end of the world, you know, I probably won't see it. It'll be 10 years down the track. But it's a process that started. I don't believe personally that the politicians are going to touch it this side of an election. So it'll just drift. And if there's a change of government, what is the view of the probable change of government? Are they going to have the same views as the current government? Don't know.
So effectively, Mr Mayor, if I may, the way I see it is that the survey that we've just done is almost null and void. Is it? Would that be correct or?
I don't think
what?
so.
No?
I think it was put in two or three parts.
Okay.
You go with
Yeah.
Clarence or you go with Sorrell and whatever. So I guess all that's got to be defined.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr Mayor, if I may, you're absolutely right, but at the end of the day, there were 36% of people wanted the 4 council amalgamations. Now that Clarence is off the table, would those people change their mind? Would they still now want to be amalgamated with just Tasman and Sorrell? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but you know, if their preference was 4 councils, which included a city council because it clearly had the most savings, would they now still want to amalgamate with 2 councils? And there really is very little between the preferred options. If you take that one away, there's very little between the preferred options of a GSBC, Sorrell and Tasman at 29% and the shared services at 27%. So, you know, it would be interesting to know whether the 36% of the people who voted or favoured a 4 council merger, whether they still would in fact favour merger with only 2. But as the Mayor's rightfully said, that's for a discussion for another day, I think.
Well, Mr Mayor, we did discuss that. We're going to have a workshop about it, so I'm not sure. Is the workshop going to be of any use? I mean, apart from writing the letter to say where are we at now with the local government? So I'm not sure if the workshop's going to be a viable thing to have. But I mean, just leading on from that, we have spoke in this meeting beforehand about bus trips and maybe having workshops at different towns. And I fully support that. And the question about notice, would you investigate that could be done for other ratepayers in the area in the next coming months, that we could move into areas to have a workshop and then also a public discussion afterwards or beforehand?
Well, I mean, it's entirely up to yourself as councillors. All I can say is that we've got various people, chairs, independents, to do it recently, and on that basis, there's the outcome. Now, it's the same old story. How many people turn up and where, and the figures will be there somewhere as how many turned up at Coles Bay, Bicheno, Swansea, or whatever the case may be. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink it.
As Councillor Wisby said a short time ago, it's not only just meeting the people, it's seeing the actual assets that the council own and what should be done and what has been done.
Yep.
So we're fully informed of what's happening in Bicheno and Coles Bay and Buckland.
Yep.
I mean, that could be part of the day, part of the workshop, part of the meeting of the people.
Well, that can be part of the workshop. Yeah, absolutely.
I think, Mr Mayor, if I may, one of the things that probably needs to, the councillors need to be aware of is that the local government board has already been established for this South East Council feasibility study. There's been a chair appointed. Sorrell and Tasman have indicated that, obviously Sorrell and Tasman have indicated that they want the review to go ahead because that's why this board has been put in place. They're now currently waiting on Glamorgan Spring Bay's decision because we would effectively slot into that board. That's how it is. So they would be looking for a sooner rather than later decision as to whether we want to be part of that board review.
So we should have a workshop, in other words.
Mayor Kent, I think we should have a workshop and we should consider it, and it's very important and we should ponder for a while. And I don't really like pondering, but I think we do actually, this is really, really important. I think we need to consider it and possibly have some conversations with people like Deputy Mayor Arnold was saying then, what would people think now that Clarence is out of the mix, what their position would be. So it'd probably be nice to have some of those conversations over the Christmas period.
I think, Mayor Kent, I also think that probably some of the comments that were made on those are really important, you know, of why you want it or why you don't, you know, because it actually might be more about, you know, our performance. You know, I'm not suggesting that's what is, but it gives you a better idea of where people are coming from too, you know. I did notice also on that it didn't have where, like, if you didn't agree with amalgamation, do you agree with shared services?
And
Yeah.
divinity.
If you supported that, what, you know, so there was that double. So anyway, there are lots of things to look
Okay.
at if we had the, so that's what I would be asking for too.
Okay, fair
Thank you.
enough. Thank you. Any further questions without notice? Councillor Park.
Just one short one. The gatehouse, I noticed the painting or whatever you call of the bark canoes been taken down. Why is that?
I think it was there just temporary till they had it. No, sorry, okay. Ms Tovey?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it had bubbled. The preparation of the paint underneath it wasn't adequate, so it's being replaced. So it was actually not looking aesthetically great. Only if you go inside would you have noticed that.
Okay.
So it is being replaced so that it.
So will there be a new one in by Christmas?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any further questions, councillor? So before I close this meeting, I'd just like to thank the Deputy Mayor for taking over the mayoral position whilst I was overseas for a couple of weeks. Thank you very much and much appreciated. And being no further business, I declare the meeting closed. The live streaming and recording of meetings will now be switched off. The Mayor, to check that streaming has been terminated. Thank you. Closed. 15 minutes. We've got councillors. We're back.